Hello again, YouTube. So I'd said I was going to make a longer video. I'd said this for a long time and not done it. I'm going to take 4 or 5 minutes at the most. You can skip it if you want and explain why I've not made any more videos. It's not as if nothing has happened that's interesting or I didn't have anything I wanted to share regarding this subject, but just life kind of got in the way. A lot of things intervened. Going to talk about that for like 4 minutes here. First of all, I've had some health issues very late 2020, like December the 28th or 29th, right before New Year's of 2021. I was working in our garage. I came in and laid down on a couch and suddenly had very bad double vision. About 3 days later, I went to the hospital. They said I had conjunctivitis, which is a minor infection on the surface of your eye, which I did have, but it got worse and worse. I'd had a stroke in my cerebellum. I was on the couch for about 2 months. This eye had something called a gaze palsy. If I tried to move, this eye would not move at all, so I couldn't even hardly walk. Tremendous pressure in my head. So it was a mess. I had a stroke. And that healed up amazingly well over about 2 months. And then right after that, my left leg started killing me. It turned out they think I had the stroke because I had a vein in the top of my left leg that was 99% collapsed or clogged. So I had to have a stent put in my leg. Basically, I'm falling apart. I'll be 72 if I live till February the 10th of 2024. So I'm 71 now. So anyway, I had these health things. Right after I got over that, somebody asked me to be on a podcast. I did one. Somebody heard that. I ended up doing like 9 of these things, and I got tired of listening to myself talk. Plus, there's a lot of people I've met who have had much, much more experience with these phenomena, who've had much crazier experiences, and who are probably the people that those podcasters should be talking to. There's about 10 million of these podcasts now. I just got burnt out with the whole thing. Everybody and his brother who has nothing else to do has started a UFO, paranormal, Bigfoot, whatever podcast. So, and I got in a Facebook group on Facebook that's a bunch of people like, kind of my age or maybe younger, but a bunch of serious-minded, normal adult people who have had experiences like mine, and typically theirs have been much weirder. So I had a lot of my energies were directed. I was focused on that, but I've got some interesting things to talk about and present here, I think. And but that's what's happened is I kind of got burnt out with the whole topic, listening to myself talk. I've talked. My story is out there in 2 ways. It's out there in that it's weird, and it's out there publicly in a big way. And I'm like, kind of, so what? Like I said, a lot of people have had much weirder things happen than me. But I find it interesting. I'm going to share some things with you. Hopefully you find them interesting. But that's where I've been. Health problems. Did a bunch of podcasts. Got totally burnt out with the whole thing. And then, too, I'm in this Facebook group with about 150 people. And spend a lot of time talking to those folks and commiserating. And, that's the story. That's where I've been. But with that, here's some interesting stuff. Things I think you will find interesting that have happened that are, it's been, my life's been a strange journey. Let's just put it that way. Okay, I'd mentioned in a much earlier video that one summer evening a few years ago, our doorbell rang. It was like 7 o'clock at night, still light outside. My wife and I go to the door, and there's a lady who we don't recognize, a thin blonde woman, and she appeared very, very distressed and was saying, I just want to make sure you folks are okay. I want to know if you're all right, blah, blah, blah. And we had no idea who she was nor what she was talking about. And she explained that she was our neighbor. She lives right next door, and they live on a large lot, like 3 or 4 acres up on a hill kind of behind us. We'd never met them. And she's a chiropractor, as is her husband. Very, very nice people. We've met them now. But she said that she was, I think, looking out her kitchen window, and she said there appeared to be a huge explosion up by our sliding glass door as she looked down on our backyard, and there was nothing in our backyard. And my wife and I were sitting right here. There's a sliding glass door right there. We didn't see or hear anything. In fact, I've talked to her subsequently, and the explosion was bigger, if I understand her correctly, than I thought she meant that it was originally. She said it was huge. She said she thought kind of like our house had exploded. Our 2-story house had exploded in a ball of blue and white light, all right? And we're sitting here, and saw and heard nothing. So anyway, that's how we met our neighbors. That was our introduction to them, is her coming over telling us this weird story. And about a year later, her husband came running over to the house. He calls me Butch. That's my nickname. He said, "Hey, Butch, have you seen the lights behind the houses?" And I was like, "No, what lights?" And he and his wife had filmed this strange aerial phenomena, but they'd seen a lot of lights behind the houses. And there's nothing behind our houses for like a mile. There's some railroad tracks. It's basically just woods. And they'd seen a bunch of stuff and filmed two things. One, I'm going to show it to you now. The first thing, he brought it to me on a thumb drive, this little video. The first thing looks like a chevron or something, almost like the Phoenix Lights. And the second thing is an orb that I zoom in on at the end of the video. I used Camtasia to try to, it's just this pulsating orb that was moving slowly, then kind of takes off really fast. I don't know what this is. But anyway, here's that.
That's not an airplane. It's going super fast. And it was like not moving before. It is blinking, but that is not a typical airplane. And it was like not moving before. And it was like not moving before.
So what is that stuff? Man, I have no idea. I know the orb's kind of hard to see. I tried to zoom in. It's just a pulsating orb. And they said they'd seen other stuff, and that was what they filmed. They got interested in this. And one night they asked us if we'd like to come up and sky watch with them. So we did. And we were all up behind their house looking south, and at one point, of course, I turn around and look behind me and up, and there's this, from where I was standing going at like a 45, way up in the sky, there was this very, very small white light, but it didn't have like a tail, like a meteor, and it was going crazy fast, and it was very small. In fact, I didn't even say much to them, my wife or the neighbors, because if they would have turned around, I wouldn't have seen it. It was going so fast. So I don't know what that was either, but I didn't make a fuss about it because I couldn't say, "Hey, look," because it was just like zooming crazy. So one night I'm sitting in this chair and there's some windows in front of me that look at the neighbor's house across the street, our other neighbor, and there's these two white lights that look like, at first I thought it was an airplane, but there's two white lights attached to something moving away from us and above his house, quite a ways up, but very bright. And I stood up from my chair, and my jaw was like, my wife was like, "What are you looking at?" And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Wow, I don't know." She ran out the front door as it moved away, and she came running in and said, "Wow, as it got further away, those lights on the end of it turned blue." And I was like, "What is that stuff? That's not an airplane. I don't know." It just seems like this stuff is around wherever I'm at kind of all the time. But I don't know if I should add this. I haven't checked with my neighbor. I don't think he would care if I said this. They have a friend that they work with who they describe as kind of steady Eddie, Mr. Straight. This guy would never, he's not a guy who would be into UFOs or anything. And they swear that he told them one night he woke up on a table with these little gray guys all around him, and he was fighting them, and he heard them say telepathically, "We can't do this with him. He's too strong," or something. And they swear that this is like the last guy on the planet that would make this up. And I've gotten to know my neighbors, and there's no way they'd make this up. And so this stuff is pretty rampant. One good thing about doing the podcasts was I did find some more witnesses to the 1994 triangle sighting that I had. And I've got some audio video stuff I want to share here that is pretty compelling and adds credence to the story that I've already told you about seeing this triangle in 94, and the details are totally bizarre in a couple of ways, and I'll try to explain it as best I can. So as anybody who's watched my videos knows, this all started for me on like March the 18th, 1994, when I drove my car right underneath this massive silent triangular UFO that was sitting maybe 125 foot above an interstate freeway just south of Flint, Michigan. Two of my coworkers got to work an hour late, two ladies. One of those ladies was my best friend at work. She was really a mess, and over a period of like a week described to me an abduction experience. It was really bizarre. I didn't know the other lady, and I never spoke to her. But my then wife, my ex-wife now, also worked at that plant, and she talked to the other lady one day while they worked together on a line, and the gal told her that her and Carolyn had been abducted by aliens, and she's been trying to get pregnant, but she's been having miscarriages, and not only were they abducted, but she swore that she was sure these guys had, quote, made her pregnant, which my wife told me on the way home, and at that point, I just kind of shut down, said, I don't want to hear about this anymore. I quit that job. 2 weeks later, it was a lousy temp job. I didn't know that lady's last name. I thought I would never hear any more about her. And of course, as the way my life works, like 20 years later, I'm divorced and remarried. My wife does a search on the internet for something like carpool alien abduction Flint, and lo and behold, she finds a submission to the MUFON website made by this coworker that I didn't know, that I never talked to, Felicia, who had told my then wife that she was sure these guys had made her pregnant. And Felicia gives some details in her report that differ slightly from Carolyn's. It's just more specific. And the final sentence of her report kind of blew me away. I was on a podcast and they read this at the top, and I thought it would be interesting for you to hear how Felicia remembered this whole thing and what she says at the very end, which is just bizarre.
As part of Communication Corner tonight, I would like to share with you a submission that had went into MUFON. Felicia writes, in March 1994, a fellow co-worker and I carpooled together to work in Brighton, Michigan. The week that this incident happened, it was her time to drive. So usually when the other would drive, the other would take a nap. So that was what I was doing when I woke up to a whirring noise, sounding like a womb, womb, womb. And the full-size van with camper on top was spinning around and around. But it seemed as though we were still and it was spinning around. I also noticed that there was a bright white cloud surrounding us. It was bright like a light. I also observed my coworker was acting like she was in a trance of some kind, looking straight ahead, and when she would turn the steering wheel from left to right, the van would move side to side as though no ground was underneath. Then I blacked out. Next thing I remember is coming down from the sky in an incline at top speed, very fast toward oncoming traffic. Then all of a sudden we stopped. Neither one of us moved our seats. We were still. I looked back to see if we could back up and go the way we were going, or go back to the last exit and turn around and head to work. But when I looked back, it was as though we were in a huge football field lit up with very bright colors, reds, yellows, greens, and oranges. Keep in mind this happened around 4 a.m. and was pitch dark at this time in the winter. We decided to go to the last exit we had just passed and turn around to head to work, since we were not harmed. During this time, there was a lot of traffic. No one stopped to help, or the incident didn't stop traffic at all. It was as though no one saw us. Well, when we got to our jobs, we were 1 hour late. We had left in plenty of time for work, so we should not have been late. But what bothered me the most is how some co-workers that followed the same highway saw the craft. Several eyewitnesses said it was massive. I put two and two together and realized that we were in it, and the strangest thing of this whole incident is that I became pregnant with my oldest son, who is now 17 years old.
I mean, what do you even say to this? This is so out there. I think there's people in the UFO thing that don't even know what to make of me and the story. I've said that before. I mean, it's really out there. Some things she said really rang some bells for me, too. She said that there was traffic, and yet it seemed like people couldn't see them. Well, there was a couple of us at work that were very vocal and freaked out about seeing this, but most people didn't seem like they saw it. So I think only some people could see it. I don't know that, but that's the feeling I got. It's totally bizarre stuff. Anyway, so I do these podcasts, and I've mentioned before that I had this happen on March 18th of 1994, and in subsequent years I have found 3 or 4 people that have seen the same object at the same spot, but on, over a span of like 25 years. And a kid came forward after I did a podcast, a young man about 24, very stable guy, got a great job, smart kid, and he had an experience virtually identical to mine, pretty much. On March the 23rd of 2019, we're talking the same spot, everything is the same feelings. I'm just going to play you the video. It's crazy. It's totally crazy. I know some people aren't going to believe this. I don't know what to tell you. Here's Alex.
And so he didn't have a license, so I had to drive him to work. And he worked third shift at GM at the plant there next to Bishop. Dropped him off, went through the security gate, hopped back on the highway. Right where Guy said he initially saw the lights when I hopped on the highway. I didn't see the lights that soon. As soon as Guy saw it, I saw it later on when I was driving. If anybody's familiar with 23 going south, on the left side of 23 going south, there's a big like landfill. And then as soon as I got past that curve, the lights sort of just like blinding, like they were just right there, but like they're miles away, but they were just so bright. And they're right over, I could tell that they were really, really low. And I feel like I'm a level-headed guy, and I immediately went through my head. I started a checklist. Like, I was like, okay, so what could this be? Right? Like, is this a plane? I was looking at it for a good 10 seconds after I said, is this a plane? I didn't see any blinking lights. It wasn't moving. And no, I didn't think it was a helicopter because, again, there's no blinking lights, and I knew that they need to have a blinking light. But I started slowing down. I slowed down a lot. Like, I mean, I was going 25 when I looked at my speedometer, getting up close to it, and it got real crazy when I got up close to it, because at that point I rolled down my passenger side window just because I didn't want any glare or anything from the lights. I wanted to actually really get a good look at it. And like Guy said, I mean, this thing was literally, I mean, it was touching the trees practically. I've told Guy, I bet money I could hit it with a rock. I mean, it was 200 feet up in the air. Like, if I had the right, I could hit it. It was so close. And yeah, but when I got up underneath it, I could tell that it was a triangle. I mean, the 3 recessed lights on each side, and clear as day. I mean, I was literally only 150 feet away from it. And right in the middle, like Guy said too, this is what really freaked me out. I mean, the light, everything was scary, but like, right next to it is when I was able to see the red light that was underneath it. And that was huge. It was way bigger than the other lights. And it was like, at that point too, the other lights weren't illuminating the craft at all. But when I looked at the red light actually illuminated the craft. And that's when I actually was able to like see the blackness of it, the grayish blackness. And I actually kind of forgot about this, but when I was talking to Guy and he was telling me about what he saw, he said that like he saw like it looked like grates on the bottom of it, like
Yes.
weird, like a weird pattern, and like that
Like
just,
a texture.
yeah, and that hit me immediately because like I remember a texture. It was a texture, and I remember it just being like my first thing I just thought of is just like, this is alien as hell. This is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I'm like, and like Guy said, the craziest part about it is like, you just, in my head, I kept on like, I always go back in my head and thinking like, why didn't I stop? You know, because I could have stopped right next to it. I could have got probably the best video of a UFO probably ever. But I didn't, because really in my head, it felt like it kept on telling me just like, don't stop. You're not supposed to be here. Kept on going, keep on going, keep on going.
What do you say? Here's a guy 25 years after I have this experience who's describing like the same thing almost exactly at the same spot, the same feelings, the same kind of message in your head. It's just so bizarre and so weird. And he said when he heard me on this podcast, he was laying in bed on a Sunday morning with his girlfriend. He'd done a search for Triangles, Michigan UFO or something. He said when he heard it, he started crying because this was a scary thing at the time, and there's a lot of emotional baggage attached to this for some reason for me and obviously for him. But anyway, that was bizarre, and it gets even kind of weirder, believe it or not. So not only does Alex hear that original podcast I did with Wayne and Michelle on the Michigan UFO and Paranormal podcast, and he reaches out to them, and we did one with three of us, and the other person was a guy named Ed Satia, who also had this experience, kind of, but he had it on the same day as me, and the details are absolutely friggin' crazy. They're just crazy. About Ed Satia, too, I just want to say rest in peace, Ed. I miss him a lot. He was a wonderful, fun guy, and he passed away at 53 this past February 8th, I believe it was, and I miss him. Anyway, Ed heard me on the original podcast. He reached out as well, and this was his story. Ed was ex-military. He'd been a radar specialist aboard a plane during Operation Desert Storm back in, like, I guess the 90s. I think he was ex-Air Force. He was also a licensed commercial pilot. So this is a guy that knew aerial phenomena and, had been in the military with a high security clearance. And this is the way this all came down. I'll try to explain it. It's bizarre. He reached out and said that on the morning that I'd seen this, I'd seen it on a Friday in March of 94. It was March the 18th. And he reached out to the podcast and said, I saw exactly what Guy described, but I saw it about an hour earlier and about 40 miles east of where he saw it. And he said, it was a Friday in March, but I don't know if it was the 18th like Guy. And so Wayne and Michelle decided to do a second podcast with the three of us, myself, Ed, and Alex. But Ed, for the life of him, could not recall if it was the same Friday as my sighting, if it was the 18th. He knew it was a Friday in March of 94, and he'd seen it about 40 miles east of Flint at about 4 in the morning. But he didn't know if it was the 18th. So Ed and I got to know each other via Messenger, right? We talked a lot in the run-up to doing this podcast. The night before we're going to do the podcast, Ed messages me and says, I recall the date. I got the date. It's the same day as you. It's the same day as you. It was the 18th. And I was like, well, how did you what finally piqued your memory, or what caused you to remember that it was the 18th? I'm going to play Ed's testimony, by the way, but Ed had this very gravelly voice, which you'll hear, but he says to me, man, I remembered it was St. Patty's Day. And he said, so I decided I'd go up to the Night Owl Bar in Imlay City and get a couple of beers, And he said, I walked in and they had this band playing, and the band said they were taking requests. So he said when they were on a break, he said, I walked over to the band table and I said, hey, can you guys play Wipeout? And some smartass said, oh man, we don't know the words, you know. The joke being there are no words, Wipeout is a drum solo. And he said, man, he chuckled and said, man, really chapped my ass, you know. And that's what brought this memory back that it was the 18th. And I said, Ed, you know that band that was playing there that you had this interaction with? That band was called Debbie Lee and the Cruisers, and I was the piano player. I mean, and I've never been to Imlay City before nor since in my life. I was there 3 nights, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, March 17th, 18th, and 19th of 1994. So an hour or so before we're both to have this experience, he and I are in this same bar for different reasons. I'm just working, and he has an interaction with a band member, and that's what piques his memory 30 years later that it was March the 18th of 1994. I mean, my jaw just about hit the floor. I could not believe it. I was absolutely stunned. I was like, is this dude making this up? Like I said, I've never been there before nor since, and this is how he remembered. The question became, was I the guy who said that? I was typically diplomatic. I don't think I would have said that to him, but be that as it may, just the fact that this is how he remembered, and I've never been to Imlay City again, and I'd never been there before, is way out there, man. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, here's Ed's testimony.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ed. I live in Port Huron, Michigan, and my sighting was back at the morning of the 18th of March, 1994. The same time Guy seen his, except I seen mine maybe hour and a half earlier than he had seen his. I would stay at my parents' at the time. It was hot as heck there, and I needed gas for in the morning, so I decided to head to K-Pac, Michigan to get some gasoline. And I was heading south on K-Pac Road, and it's no man's land. I don't know if you guys have ever been out there. There's absolutely like no lights or anything out there. And I noticed that the corner of my eye, from it'd be like the northeast, a weird colored like white light. And I held a valid airline transport pilot license at the time. And it struck me as strange as the color, you know. I kind of kept my eye on it in the mirror. And when you flew, you know how your crab when you're crosswind landing, it kind of moved like that, you know, behind my car because it was coming from the north. And I looked ahead a little bit, and all of a sudden it was like there above my car going over at an angle towards it'd be the southwest towards like Imlay City, the Pier and Flint area. It was huge, like you said. It was like 200 by 200 by 200 feet. And it had the 3 recessed lights that, you know, they didn't shine down on the road or nothing. And it moved off the angle. Like Michelle said, I seen the back lights. It had like 5 red lights on it. And it was just like no noise, just cruising. And what the heck is it, you know? It was kind of stepped on it, and it was going at the southwest angle, you know, across fields and whatnot. And I watched it, so it was kind of small, and then it was like on Star Trek when it, you know, in the Enterprise, it just like blinks. It was like blink, and it was gone. So I kept heading towards K-Pac. And it was, I don't know, a couple few miles later, that's when the F-16s blew by with the afterburners on. So then I got back home, and, you know, the radio, the news, nothing. And I just, like I said, you guys, just one of the things, you know, they say it was a weather balloon or whatever, but, you know, I was like, I know what I saw. But it was weird. It was just like an hour before he's seen his.
Yeah. Now, K-Pac is by Selfridge Air National Guard Base, correct?
That's probably about 45 minutes north of there. It's I-60 minutes.
And so you saw the F-16s. They looked like they were in pursuit of this thing.
Yeah, they had the afterburners going.
Wow.
I said I was in Desert Storm. I was on the airfield and I was in aviation, and I knew what those were. They shake your
Exactly.
guts and they blow over you.
Yeah. So you have a lot of experience with aviation, and what you saw was not like a B-2 or anything like that.
Oh no, not at all. And then it was like 2 stories tall on top of it.
Yeah.
It's just massive, massive. And so that's what, how a guy said it. The lights on the corners, and how you said it. How they, any other aircraft, you got beams shining down the road or lighting up the roadway, and they were just like lights that were there.
Yeah. Because landing lights on aircraft shine down and forward at an angle so they can illuminate the runway as they're getting close to touching down. These things were straight down. They serve no purpose.
They're like recessed up in the corners.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Insane.
Like the corners were just emitting light.
And what time would you say that it was when you saw this thing?
I'd be around 4 o'clock in the morning.
So that's Ed's testimony. About an hour before I saw this thing, 40 miles east of Flint, he had the thing above his car. It drifted off across the field, went to warp speed, he said, chased by F-16s. And so 30 years after we both have this life-altering experience, we find each other and find out that, that an hour before we had this life-changing experience, we were in the same room, this bar, and he had this interaction with one of our band members. Could have been me, I don't think it was. But, that's just totally bizarre. But I would only add this. Ed was such a character. I miss him. I really miss him a lot. We became good friends. I went over and met him in Port Huron. And I did ask him at one point, I said, hey, do you see repeating digits of numbers on clocks? And he said, oh, yeah, all the time. I said, did you have this before you saw this UFO? And he went, nope. Started after I saw the UFO. So I don't know what this is. I mean, it started for me after 2012 when I had this blue light around my house. And I'd never heard of this. It's a thing in pop culture now. You hear about it a lot. I had never heard of this. And I don't think he had either. And I'm sure he didn't. So, and his started in 1994. It's just, it has some effect on our neurology, our consciousness, or some neurological effect, proximity to these things. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but there was that. But we became really good friends. Very funny guy. Very funny. I miss him a lot. Rest in peace, Ed. Well, this is already very long, and I had some other things I wanted to get into, some really strange electronic interference stuff that seems to happen around me. I mean, my cardiologist's office has told me they're afraid of me. That's a long story. Weird stuff with animals, deer, and an owl, and just a whole bunch of weird stuff that I think I'm going to save that for another video. I've heard some stories from a couple of friends that are like pillars of our community and very conservative, and they're just insane. And I thought those would be interesting to share. But I think for now I'm just going to wrap this up, and I hope you found it interesting. There was some new stuff. Now, the stuff from the podcasts was out there, but I assumed probably some people on my channel had not seen that. So, with that, the wife's coming home. I don't get a chance to make these videos. Plus, here she is, coming right now. Anyway, for now, peace, and I'm out. I'm going to try to upload some videos talking about the things I just explained. Sorry, this was kind of long and rambling. But keep your eyes to the skies and what's going on. Where are they from? What are they? This old man don't know. Be nice to each other.